When a devout cowboy discovers a hidden door in an abandoned saloon that leads to evidence of his town's darkest secret, he must choose between preserving his faith and exposing a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of his church. The floorboards sang wrong. Jake Morrison pressed his boot against the warped planks of the Copper Creek Saloon, feeling them give with a hollow thump that didn't match the solid oak they appeared to be. November 2018. The Wyoming wind howled through broken windows, carrying the scent of early snow and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded him of the funeral parlor back in town. But funeral parlors didn't smell like fear. Jake had come to the abandoned saloon to pray, as he did every Sunday after church. The building had been empty for 30 years, ever since the mining company pulled out and left Copper Creek to die a slow death. It was the only place in town where he could find true silence, where the weight of being the pastor's son didn't press down on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The wrong sound came again when he shifted his weight. Not the solid thunk of boot on wood, but something hollow, something that suggested empty space where there should be none. Jake knelt and ran his calloused fingers along the floorboard's edge. The wood was newer here, despite the weathered appearance. Someone had gone to great lengths to make this repair invisible. But 40 years of ranch work had taught Jake to notice when things didn't belong. The sweet smell grew stronger as he worked his knife along the board seam. Not decay, not death, something chemical, something that made his stomach clench with a recognition he couldn't quite place. The board came free with a soft pop, revealing a brass handle set into the floor beneath, a trap door. Hidden for decades in a building everyone assumed was empty. The trapdoor opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Jake's phone flashlight cut through shadows that seemed reluctant to retreat, revealing stone walls that belonged in a mine shaft, not beneath a frontier saloon. The chemical smell was stronger here, mixed with something else, old paper and leather. The scent of secrets kept too long. At the bottom of the stairs, Jake found himself in a circular chamber carved from living rock. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, their metal surfaces gleaming despite the underground location. Someone had been maintaining this place, but it was the altar that made Jake's breath catch. Not a Christian altar. Something older, darker. A stone slab surrounded by symbols that hurt to look at directly, stained with substances that could have been rust or could have been something worse. On the altar lay a single item, a leather-bound ledger. Its pages yellowed with age, but its binding pristine. Jake approached slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the cross around his neck, a gift from his father on his 18th birthday. Blessed by the bishop himself, the cross felt cold against his palm. Jake opened the ledger to the first page. Names filled the columns in neat handwriting, each accompanied by dates and amounts. But these weren't financial records. The amounts were too small, too specific. And the dates? The dates went back 50 years. Jake recognized some of the names. Families from Copper Creek. People who'd attended his father's church. People who'd trusted Pastor Morrison with their deepest secrets, their darkest fears. People who'd disappeared. The ledger triggered a memory Jake had buried for 20 years. He was 8 years old, hiding in the church basement during one of his father's special meetings. The adults spoke in hushed tones about cleansing and purification, about removing the stain of sin from their community. Jake had thought they were talking about baptism. Now, reading the ledger's careful notations, he understood they'd been talking about something else entirely. Sarah Chen, November 15th, 1998. Adultery confirmed. Cleansing complete. 500. Miguel Santos, March 3, 2001. Theft from collection plate. Purification achieved. 7/5 Rebecca Walsh. August 12, 2005. Questioning church doctrine. Redemption finalized. 1-200. Jake remembered these people. Sarah Chen had run the town's only Chinese restaurant until she'd suddenly left for family reasons. Miguel Santos had been the church janitor who'd disappeared one winter night. Rebecca Walsh had been Jake's Sunday school teacher, a kind woman who'd asked too many questions about biblical contradictions. All of them gone. All of them listed in the ledger with clinical precision. The chamber around him took on new meaning. Not a storage room or forgotten mine shaft, but something purpose-built. The ventilation system was too sophisticated for a simple basement. The drainage in the floor too deliberate. This was a place designed for things that needed to be hidden. Jake found more ledgers in the filing cabinets, each covering different decades. The handwriting changed over the years, but the format remained constant. Names, crimes, punishments, payments. His father's handwriting appeared in the most recent volumes. "You shouldn't be here, son." Jake spun around to find Pastor Morrison descending the stone stairs, his usually kind face hard with an expression Jake had never seen before. His father moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this hidden place. "Dad, what is this place?" "It's a necessity." Pastor Morrison stepped into the chamber, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "Some sins require more than prayer to cleanse." Jake held up the ledger, his hands shaking. "These people, what happened to them?" "They found peace." His father's voice carried the same tone he used during sermons, but the words felt hollow in the underground chamber. "They were suffering, Jake, trapped by their sins, unable to find redemption through conventional means. You killed them. I saved them." Pastor Morrison moved closer, and Jake noticed his father's hands were stained, not with ink or dirt, but with something darker. "Do you think Sarah Chen would have found happiness living with the shame of her adultery? Do you think Miguel could have lived with the guilt of stealing from God's house?" Jake backed toward the filing cabinets, his mind reeling. "You're talking about murder. I'm talking about mercy." His father's eyes held the fervor Jake had seen during his most passionate sermons. "Some souls are too damaged for earthly redemption. We simply expedited their journey to judgment." "We?" Pastor Morrison smiled, and for the first time in Jake's life, his father looked like a stranger. "Did you think I worked alone? The church has been cleansing this community for generations. Your grandfather started this work. I continued it, and someday when you're ready, you'll take over." The weight of inheritance pressed down on Jake like a physical force. Not just the church, not just the congregation's trust, but this chamber of secrets and the terrible work it represented. "I won't be part of this. You already are." His father gestured to the ledger in Jake's hands. "You've seen the records. You know the truth. That makes you complicit, whether you choose to participate or not." That night, Jake returned to the chamber alone. He'd spent hours walking the mountain trails, trying to process what he'd learned. His father, the man who'd taught him about compassion and forgiveness, was a serial killer. The church Jake had attended his entire life was built on a foundation of murder. But it was worse than that. Jake found the financial records hidden behind the false back of the largest filing cabinet. The cleansing operation wasn't just about religious zealotry. It was about money families paid to have their problems solved. Businesses contributed to have competitors eliminated. The church had become a murder-for-hire operation, disguised as spiritual purification, and the money had built everything Jake had ever known. The church building, the parsonage where he'd grown up, his college education, his truck, his clothes, his entire life, all of it paid for with blood money. Jake found his own name in the most recent ledger, with a note in his father's handwriting: "Jacob Morrison, potential successor, begin preparation phase, estimated completion." Christmas 2018. His father had been planning to induct him into the operation. The special responsibilities Pastor Morrison had been hinting about. The private meetings Jake was supposed to start attending after the holidays. It was all preparation for making him a killer. But the most devastating discovery came in the chamber's deepest recess. Behind a steel door Jake hadn't noticed before. Bodies, dozens of them, preserved in chemical baths that explained the sweet smell permeating the chamber. Not buried or cremated, but kept like trophies, like proof of the church's good work. Jake recognized faces from missing person posters, from family photos in the church directory. People who'd been mourned, searched for, grieved over, all of them here, in this underground mausoleum of his father's making. The next morning brought visitors to the Morrison house. Jake was packing his truck when 3 men in expensive suits arrived. They moved with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to being obeyed, their eyes scanning the property with professional assessment. Jacob Morrison, the leader, a thin man with silver hair, extended his hand. "I'm Bishop Caldwell. Your father has told me so much about you." Jake recognized the name from church hierarchy, but he'd never met the man in person. Bishop Caldwell oversaw dozens of churches across 3 states, a position of enormous influence within their denomination. "We understand you've been exploring your family's legacy," the bishop continued. "Your father is quite proud of your curiosity." "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you do." Bishop Caldwell's smile never reached his eyes. "The work your family has done for the church is invaluable. We're here to discuss your role in continuing that tradition." The other men flanked Jake, not threatening but present. Their message was clear. This wasn't a request. "What if I'm not interested?" "Then you'd be the first Morrison to refuse the calling." Bishop Caldwell gestured toward the house where Jake had grown up. "Your great-grandfather started this work during the Depression, when the community was plagued by sin and desperation. Your grandfather refined the methods. Your father perfected them. You're talking about murder. We're talking about salvation." The bishop's voice carried absolute conviction. "Do you think God is pleased with a world full of adulterers, thieves, and heretics?" "We are his instruments of purification." Jake felt the weight of generations pressing down on him. Not just his family's legacy, but the expectations of an entire religious hierarchy that had built its power on systematic murder. "I need time to think." "Of course. But not too much time." Bishop Caldwell handed him a business card. "Your first assignment is scheduled for Christmas Eve. A young woman who's been spreading dangerous ideas about church doctrine. Consider it your final exam." That night, Jake found his father's private study hidden behind the chamber's altar. The room contained decades of correspondence between the Morrison family and church leadership. Letters from bishops, cardinals, even higher authorities Jake didn't recognize. The operation wasn't limited to Copper Creek or even Wyoming. It was national, possibly international. Churches across the country had their own cleansing operations, all coordinated through a central authority that decided who lived and who died based on their adherence to a twisted interpretation of religious doctrine. But it was his father's personal journal that revealed the most devastating truth. Pastor Morrison hadn't started as a killer. He'd been recruited, just as Jake was being recruited now. The journal detailed his father's initial horror, his attempts to refuse, and his eventual acceptance of what he saw as divine will. "I thought I could change things from the inside," one entry read. "I thought I could make the work more humane, more selective. But the system is bigger than any one man. It has its own momentum, its own terrible logic. Once you're part of it, there's no escape. I pray Jake will be stronger than I was, but I fear the choice won't be his to make." The final entry was dated just days before Jake's discovery of the chamber. "They're coming for him soon. I've delayed as long as I can, but Bishop Caldwell is losing patience. If Jake refuses, they'll eliminate him as a security risk. If he accepts, he'll become what I became, a monster wearing the mask of a holy man. I should have burned this place down years ago. Should have exposed everything and faced the consequences. But I was weak. I chose my own survival over justice. God forgive me. I've damned my own son." Jake was preparing to flee when his father found him in the church parking lot. "Running won't save you," Pastor Morrison said quietly. "They have resources you can't imagine. Connections in law enforcement, government, even the FBI. There's nowhere you can go that they won't find you. So I should just accept it? Become a killer like you?" His father's face crumpled. "I never wanted this for you." "I tried to protect you, to keep you away from the work. But they've been watching, waiting. They see potential in you that I hoped they'd never notice." "What potential?" "Your faith." Pastor Morrison's voice broke. "Your absolute belief in right and wrong. They think they can twist that into something useful." Jake stared at his father, this man who'd taught him about love and compassion while secretly orchestrating murders. "How many people have you killed?" 47. The number came without hesitation, as if Pastor Morrison had been carrying it like a weight for years. 47 souls I sent to judgment before their time. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand the cost." His father pulled out a pistol, holding it loosely at his side. "Not just the cost to them, but the cost to yourself. Every life you take chips away at your soul until there's nothing left but the work." Jake realized with growing horror that his father wasn't there to stop him from leaving. He was there to ensure Jake never had the chance to refuse. "Dad, please." "I'm sorry, son. But they'll kill you anyway if you run. At least this way your death will have meaning. They'll see it as my final act of loyalty, proof that the Morrison family can be trusted to put the work above everything else. The gun rose slowly, and Jake saw tears streaming down his father's face. I love you. Jake, remember that. Jake had seconds to make a choice that would define not just his life, but his soul. He could fight his father, try to take the gun and escape. But even if he succeeded, Bishop Caldwell's network would hunt him down. He'd spend whatever time he had left looking over his shoulder, knowing that his father's death had bought him nothing but a temporary reprieve, or he could accept his fate. Let his father pull the trigger and end the Morrison family's participation in the church's bloody work. His death would be meaningless in the larger scheme. The operation would continue without him, but at least he wouldn't become part of it. But there was a third option, one that terrified him more than death. He could pretend to accept the assignment, join the operation, gain their trust, and then expose everything from the inside. It would mean becoming complicit in murder, at least temporarily. It would mean betraying everything he'd been taught about right and wrong. But it might be the only way to stop the killing permanently. Jake thought about the faces in the chamber below, the families who'd never learned what happened to their loved ones. He thought about the young woman Bishop Caldwell wanted him to kill on Christmas Eve, someone whose only crime was asking questions about church doctrine. How many more would die if he chose the easy path of martyrdom? Dad, Jake said quietly, what if there was another way? Pastor Morrison's hand trembled on the gun. There is no other way. I've tried everything. What if you haven't tried everything? What if you've just been trying alone? Jake pulled out his phone, showing his father the screen. I've been recording everything. The chamber, the ledgers, your confession. It's all uploaded to a secure server, set to release automatically if I don't check in every 12 hours. His father's face went white. Jake, you don't understand what you've done. They'll kill us both, maybe, but they'll also be exposed. The whole network, everything they've built, it'll all come crashing down. And how many innocent people will die in the chaos? How many churches will be destroyed? How many faithful believers will lose their faith entirely? It was the question Jake had been wrestling with since he'd made the recordings. Exposing the truth would save future victims, but it would also destroy the lives of countless innocent people who'd built their entire worldview around institutions that were fundamentally corrupt. Was justice worth that price? The confrontation came on Christmas Eve. Jake met Bishop Caldwell and his men at the abandoned saloon, as instructed. The young woman they wanted him to kill, a seminary student named Maria Santos who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about church finances, knelt bound and gagged beside the hidden trapdoor. A fitting location for your first cleansing, Bishop Caldwell said, gesturing toward the saloon's weathered interior. This building has seen so much sin over the years. Tonight we'll wash some of it away. Jake looked at Maria, seeing the terror in her eyes. She was maybe 25, with the kind of earnest intelligence that had probably made her dangerous to the church hierarchy. Her crime was curiosity. Her punishment was death. How do you want me to do it? Jake asked. Bishop Caldwell smiled approvingly. Your father prefers poison. Clean, quiet, easily disguised as natural causes. But the method is less important than the commitment. Jake nodded and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid, something he'd taken from his father's collection. This should work. He approached Maria slowly, unscrewing the vial's cap. Her eyes widened with terror as he knelt beside her. I'm sorry, he whispered, loud enough for the others to hear. Then he threw the contents of the vial in Bishop Caldwell's face. Not poison. Holy water from the church font. But the bishop's scream suggested he'd expected something else entirely. Jake cut Maria's bonds as chaos erupted around them. The other men reached for weapons, but Jake had planned for this moment. The chamber below wasn't just evidence, it was a trap. He triggered the explosive charges he'd planted throughout the underground complex, charges connected to his father's chemical storage. The saloon shook as the hidden chamber collapsed, taking with it decades of evidence and the bodies of the church's victims. But more importantly, the explosion triggered the automatic release of Jake's recordings to news outlets across the country. 6 months later, Jake stood in a federal courthouse, watching the last of Bishop Caldwell's network receive their sentences. The scandal had destroyed more than just the murderous conspiracy. Entire denominations had fractured as the scope of the corruption became clear. Churches across the country faced investigations, lawsuits, and the loss of congregations who could no longer trust religious authority. Jake's father had testified against his former colleagues, trading his cooperation for a life sentence instead of the death penalty. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something approaching redemption. Any regrets? Maria Santos asked as they left the courthouse together. She'd become an advocate for victims' families, helping them navigate the legal and emotional aftermath of the revelations. Jake considered the question. His actions had saved lives, but they'd also destroyed the faith of millions of innocent believers. Churches that had done genuine good work were shuttered alongside the corrupt ones. Communities that had found comfort in shared belief were left adrift. Every day, he admitted. But not about the choice itself. The Wyoming mountains stretched before them, unchanged by human corruption or human justice. The land endured as it always had, but the people who lived on it would have to find new ways to make sense of their place in the world. Jake had traded his faith for justice, his community for truth. It was a bargain that would define the rest of his life, the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing meant destroying everything you'd once believed in. But as he watched Maria help another victim's family find closure, Jake knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. Some truths were too important to bury, no matter how much pain they caused in the light. When a devout cowboy discovers his father's church is a front for a religious murder conspiracy, he must choose between preserving his faith and exposing a truth that will destroy everything he's ever believed in. Could you sacrifice everything you believed in to save innocent lives? Would you choose painful truth over comfortable lies? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the dark side of faith and the price of moral courage. Next week, we'll dive into the lighthouse keeper's final confession, a haunting tale of isolation, guilt, and the terrible weight of keeping deadly secrets. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss this chilling story of redemption and sacrifice.